Hey everyone, welcome back to Unsolicited. We're going to have a pretty interesting conversation here today because what we know is that cybersecurity conversations usually start after something has already gone wrong. Breach, a vulnerability, or maybe even a last-minute fire drill that suddenly has everyone's attention. So what we know often gets missed, though, is that leadership should have a long moment before that where they've already planned, and maybe that isn't happening. So today we're going to talk about the gap between cyber expertise, cyber leadership, and why so many capable organizations still struggle to deliver outcomes when the pressure is on. And our guest, David, goes by Spud Webb, is retired Air Force Cyber Operations Officer with decades of experience spanning defensive and offensive cyber operations, large-scale software acquisition, and enterprise cybersecurity. Since retiring from active duty, Spud has led and supported major cyber and software programs, advised senior leaders across government and industry, and worked at the intersection of operations, acquisition, and execution. He's also currently pursuing a PhD in cyber leadership focused on how senior educators and emerging professionals shape real-world cybersecurity outcomes. We are so glad to have you with us, Bud. Welcome.
Thank you, Hope. I don't know who you read about, but that was me. I'm just a simple guy from a small town.
We won't believe you. Once we get into this conversation, because we're having a pretty interesting one, I think everyone will know that that was what I want to do is I would like for us to kind of explore why technical expertise alone doesn't translate into effective leadership at the senior level, and where cyber professionals struggle most as the expectation shifts. So your vantage point is a pretty unique one. You've been deep in cyber operations, you've run large programs, and worked directly with military and industry senior leaders. When cyber professionals move into senior leadership roles, where do you most often see them struggle for?
Understanding the business side of cybersecurity, they have to understand what the business views not as a cost center, but it needs to be a revenue retention capability that it brings to the organization.
Okay, that's interesting. So what expectations tend to change or stay the same that make the transition harder than people expect it will be?
Traditional senior cybersecurity come from a technology background. They're technologists first, not business or C-suite executives. So there's that translation that has to happen. Cybersecurity leaders need to be able to speak to the CFO about the value from a business perspective, what it brings to the company. They need to speak to the CEO about revenue retention and why that's important. But they also have to be able to articulate that technical need to a board of directors, because the board of directors is looking at how am I going to balance the balance sheet at the end of the quarter or the end of the half year or at the end of the year. What can we do in order to continue to make money, but have revenue retention through cybersecurity?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, just the whole conversation around business acumen and how people think that just because they're in a silo or a specialty that they don't need to know that until they need to know that. But when you need it, it's probably a little late.
Correct.
I'm going to move this a little closer. Okay. Yeah, because we're just having a little tough time. But so I think that's really good advice. I think it's interesting that you're saying, hey, if you're a technical expert and you're moving into the leadership realm, make sure you're understanding how you advocate for your technicians fiscally.
Yes.
Yeah, it's important. So when a cyber specialist can't seem to get the right attention focused on a problem, what is the simplest way for them to translate a cyber risk into business decision without fear mongering?
I think the business decision piece has to be, how does this impact an organization, a company's ability to continue to make money, continue to build that piece of equipment, that software that they're responsible for producing for the community? Because if they can't solve that problem, technically they can't sell that particular capability out to the community. So understanding that value of, hey, there's a technical problem, we have to solve it so we can continue to push our product to the community.
So if you can't get your boss to hear it, make it smell like money.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes good sense. Okay, so what skills don't carry over as cleanly as people think that they will when they are going from maybe technical expert to leadership? They think they're going to be able to bring that something with them, and it just doesn't translate the same way.
If I'm a keyboard kind of person and I know how to use Metasploit, or I know how to use Outlook Web Access, or I can use the technology, but that's not my job at the next level. It's being able to translate what the business needs a capability to do to push it out to the community. That's what I think is the hardest thing to do. I can use the technology. I know about it. I know ones and zeros. But how do I determine what my boss needs to hear to fund the next generation? So a lot of the talk could be about money. What do we need in order to buy that thing? But it's about how does the business continue to make money while supporting the technologists doing the things that the company needs in order to sell that product.
I think that's a great point, because it's not just me as the leader sitting in the new seat talking about, oh, how I know. It's about taking what you know and translating that something into actionable items to make your folks more successful.
Yes.
I love the point. So at what point does technical credibility just stop being enough?
I don't know if it ever does. I think you have to have a certain level of technical acumen, because you got to be able to throw the BS flag in a room. When you've got a technologist saying, hey, we need this, Grok, ChatGPT, XYZ for an enterprise, when only 2 or 3 people in an enterprise need to use whatever that capability is. Sure, one individual may want it, but is it a requirement? Does it meet that big R need in order to fulfill what the company needs or what an organization needs? So I think that's extremely important to be able to do.
You make such a good point. I mean, our owner speaks a lot to, you have to fully understand what it is that's happening in order to understand what's needed, what's working, what's not working. And we're never going to ask for a system that we know he's going to be able to pick his way through. So I think that makes great sense. That technical expertise may always be required or come in handy. Okay, so then let's shift a little bit, because I would really like for us to examine why organizations consistently struggle to prioritize planning and preparedness, even when cyber risk is well understood. So something you mentioned previously really stood out to me, that cybersecurity often only gets real attention after something has gone wrong. So why is it so hard for organizations to invest in cyber planning before there's a visible crisis?
One of the neat analogies I like to use is your plumbing in your house. You flush the toilet, you expect it to work. But if it doesn't, what is it? It's now an emergency, but you anticipate that it's always going to work. What we fail to do in a cyber perspective or an information technology perspective is understand that there is an acquisition tail that's associated with IT or cyber capabilities. And we have to manage that appropriately through asset management and risk management. And so what we failed to do is realize that asset management turns into risk management, which is overall organizational risk. So when we're able to look at it from that perspective, I think it helps senior managers or senior leaders to go, hey, risk is important. We have to manage that risk by understanding what the crown jewels of the organization are and ensure that we are resourcing the protection of those crown jewels appropriately.
Well said. Yeah, well said. So earlier this week, while I was preparing for this conversation, there were a few articles that caught my attention around how government shutdowns, like the one that just recently occurred on Friday, and funding uncertainty are actually impacting cybersecurity operations. And one piece pointed out that when funding actually stalls, cyber programs don't just pause. And so planning, training, long-term readiness actually take a hit, even when threat activity just doesn't slow down. So when funding uncertainty or shutdowns actually happen, what's the first part of cyber preparedness that usually takes a hit, and why?
I think it's multi-pronged.
Okay.
Number one, when the individuals that are there to do incident response, incident management, disaster recovery, that's a huge hit. It really is. But a lot of organizations prep that. Those are prioritized, maybe not to the manner or to the manpower in which an organization would want them, but there are resources there. There really are. And I think we do a pretty good job of doing that. Where I think we fail is planning to ensure that when these things happen, because we know the budget cycle is going to happen. We know that an organization has an acquisition process. We have asset management that has to happen. But when that is not managed appropriately by directors of information technology or other senior leaders, that's where it fails, because now you've got outdated systems that have hit end of life that now can't be managed unless you've got a security professional that has hands-on with that equipment. There are a lot, and I was going to use a specific name, but I'm not going to do that. But there are technologies out there that have been end of life for a very long time that organizations are still using. But when we have a crisis like a lapse of funding for whatever it is, or even in an organization that does not plan accordingly to have the funding to do what they need with resources that have hit end of life, that's a failure also. So it's not just a federal budget thing. It's across the cybersecurity and information technology spectrum on every vertical.
Yeah, because our adversary doesn't care that our government has shut down.
They don't. And they don't work on an acquisition cycle either.
Yeah. Yeah, fair. Me. Okay, so if I was a contracting officer, right, and I was wanting to know what I should see as an early signal in a proposal, a staffing plan, a transition plan, something that tells me that the team is actually building preparedness into what they're offering and not just promising response, what would I look for?
Understanding start to finish asset management from an acquisition perspective. We need to buy things, we need to sustain them, and we need to sundown those things. So it needs to be a full cycle of acquisition support that the contracting officer should look at. Having sat in a position where I worked with contracting officers in the past, that's a hard conversation to have, because they want to get a capability delivered on time and quickly if possible. But we don't look at the tail end of that sustainment piece from a rapid acquisition or from a agility perspective. How do we replace things if they need to be replaced? And that's really hard, because the contracting officer, the core, whoever's involved in that acquisition process, is held to a standard by federal regulations, or a company's held to certain standards based on budgetary requirements that the CEO or CFO has mandated, that you only have X amount of money over the course of the life of a program, manage it accordingly. That's not even taking into consideration the risk that's associated with those systems from an adversarial perspective.
Oof. Wow. Okay. So what, thank you for that. What incentives actually push leaders then toward that reactionary behavior instead of like prevention? Like why does it always seem to be a reaction to something happening instead of prepping for it?
You always think your toilet's going to flush. You always think that you're going to have water. You always think the email's going to be there. But what happens if you take a power hit in your facility and now you're down for days, weeks, months? Say South Texas takes a ice storm and we lose, power and things like that. Do we try to plan for that? Sure. But too many folks are worried about the 50-foot target, not the 500-foot target, not recycling that target to make sure that incident response plans, disaster recovery plans, running through tabletop exercises to make sure that senior leaders sit in a room and understand their roles and responsibilities, because it's spelled out in a charter. This is our incident response plan. Your job as the CEO is to make sure that the resources are there to recover, that you have a partnership with local law authorities if something happens, that we have the resources from a CFO perspective to say, yes, we have X amount of dollars to spend on ransomware response from a legal perspective. Have a legal team in there with your technicians so everybody understands what's going on. It's a full team cycle in order to kind of build that.
Wow, that's good, actually. Like I think that sometimes people get in the what do I hear all the time? The paralysis by analysis,
Mhm.
right? It seems so big that it's like, oh, I'll just get to that another day rather than try to take that one little bite out and get it started.
And that has to happen. We have to have directors of IT and CISOs and CIOs that are willing to put their foot down and go, we have to do this. If you're looking at ensuring the business reputation stays intact, that cyber insurance is in place in case we get attacked. And it's not if we get attacked, it's when it happens. And you can look across the state of Texas. In the last 3 years, there's been 10 major cyber attacks that have happened that have affected communities. Some of those organizations that were attacked did not have an incident response plan. They didn't have a disaster recovery plan. They didn't know what their crown jewels were. They didn't have security in place for IT or OT systems, information technology or operational technology systems. You have to walk the dog. That's a senior leader responsibility.
Mhm.
Understand what your crown jewels are so you know how to protect those.
Yeah. It sure makes all the mass cows I ever did in my time in the military make good sense, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit because I really, really want us to talk about how pressure, expectations, and resource constraints lead organizations to overpromise, and how the decision creates downstream execution risk. The pressure to react instead of plan, as we've been talking, often creates yet a whole other issue, especially when expectations are high and resources are limited. From your experience, what happens when organizations or cyber leaders say that they're ready to deliver more than they actually are?
They get fired. And they should. Folks should have enough intestinal fortitude to go, I don't have enough resources to do A through Z. Tell me what A through F are for your priorities. How do we protect those crown jewels? How do we protect the reputation of the organization so that way senior leaders understand that there is a risk associated with making good decisions or making bad decisions, which is even worse. But the leaders have to be able to look at themselves every day and go, did I make the best decision for the organization? Would I have done it different? If I would have done it different, why? What were the decision-making factors that I took into helping my senior leadership, the C-suite, make a determination about what was important and why? But there's a lot of folks that are worried about their own personal reputation rather than having allegiance or loyalty to their organizations. Wearing a uniform, you really don't have that. We take an oath. We're going to do a thing. But when you work for company X, is there allegiance there? There should be from a security perspective because that's what you get hired to do as a security professional. But at the end of the day, if you're telling your boss that, yeah, we can take on the Super Bowl champions, but we got third graders, that we're suiting up, that's a problem.
Yeah, you've got to be honest with both
Yes.
with yourself and with your
Yes.
leadership. Yeah, there's a lot of people though that I don't know if it's ego or what they have the not on my watch sort of mentality, and so they continue to say yes and say yes and say yes until they're breaking because they didn't stand up and say, hey, look, here's the fault line.
There's a really good book called Ego is the Enemy.
Mm.
And when we look at ourselves, you go, did I do the best I could do? Did I overinflate what I could do? And we see a lot of people do that with resumes in the information technology, cybersecurity world. But at the end of the day, check your ego at the door. Do the right thing for the organization. Do the right thing for the people that are in the organization. Do the right thing for the people that the organization is supporting or selling to. That you have to do the right thing.
Yeah, it makes sense. I hate to just keep saying that I agree with you, but I mean, I think you make incredibly valid points that, understand what the need is, identify how you're going to work toward the need. Maybe you can't solve it all right now, but how are we going to start in that direction? Because you can't keep kicking the can down the road
Correct.
safely. Yeah. Okay, so we're also seeing a lot of uncertainty right now around policy and governance, including recent reporting on cyber statuses and authorities being at risk depending on legislative outcomes. How does that kind of uncertainty affect the way leaders talk about capability and readiness, especially when they're under pressure to project a certain kind of confidence?
I think there's a careful balance between being egotistical and understanding what the impact is of applying a policy to a particular vertical. versus going, yeah, we're just going to blindly comply. We are just going to use a checklist to do it and say, yes, we did it. Sometimes you have to push back, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think one of the most important things is if we look at who the policymakers are and why they're making that policy and who that policy applies to, you peel that onion back, it kind of makes sense. When we look at critical infrastructure, the 16 areas of critical infrastructure that have been kind of mandated or kind of put out there, what are we doing to protect the critical infrastructure? A lot of the critical infrastructure is owned or operated by small businesses or municipalities. They're not impacted by federal law. They may be regulated by different laws, but they can't be forced to do something because they're not a federal organization. So it's kind of like a juggling act,
Yeah.
How do you employ the right resources to protect the things that are critical? And then what are those impacts on the nation as a whole from a critical infrastructure perspective when it comes time to implement a policy or a regulation?
Balancing act.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's difficult, especially because everybody sees their piece of that pie as the emergency in the pie.
Right.
Yeah. So let's just say contracting officer, core, whichever of the two, how do they separate confidence from evidence? Meaning, what artifacts or behaviors prove readiness without turning it into a paperwork drill? How do they know when they're looking at something that someone who's offering something is really actually ready and they're not just fluffing things up?
Prove it to me. Show me the mail. Show me that you've run tabletop exercises before that have enabled you to make this claim. Show me that you have reduced risk in whatever, whether it's cyber risk, operational risk, whatever it is. What have you done to do that? And then show me. Don't be afraid to ask the question. I think one of the challenges that we have is when we have folks be required to prove that they've done something, they almost see it as a negative. I would see that as a positive. You want to know that I ran an Ironman or I completed an Ironman? I'll show you my hat.
Yeah.
You want to know that, I have done these things? Well, let's talk to the community. Let's get some validation that this has happened. And sometimes it needs to be a third party validation from a security perspective, because MSPs sometimes run the security for a particular organization that wants to be part of a government contract, or another organization that wants to hire a contractor to do something. Get some third party validation. It's a little more work, but at least now you know that folks are going to be able to do the things that they put on a piece of paper. And I think some of that should come from face-to-face interviews or the panels that we do, is make people answer the hard questions, because those questions are hard.
Well, and if they're doing all the hard work to accomplish it, they're often going to want to brag to you about it. Right. They're going to show you, even if there were some dings and dents along the way, they identified the risk ahead of time through those exercises.
Correct.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Okay, so the pressure, I've been talking a lot about like the pressures that people feel in different lanes. Why do leaders often feel pressured to then overstate their readiness when they're sitting in a seat? Why do you think there's so much hesitancy to admit that there's a vulnerability?
Because they don't want to get fired. But folks, they're going to look out for number one. I have to pay my bills. I have to feed my family. I have to make sure my dog can go to the vet. So internally, I have to go, okay, I've got to pay the bills. So what does the boss want to hear, rather than what does the boss or what does the company need to hear? There's some internal things that have to happen there. But we learn integrity is an important part of who we are.
Yeah.
So let's choose to do the right thing, even though it may be hard, and tell the boss, hey, we can't do this. What are the priorities? And it'll go back to almost every time, boss, tell me what your priorities are. These are the crown jewels. Tell me what your priorities are as far as the crown jewels go. So that way we can take care of those. And now the boss knows that there is a risk-informed decision that has happened to enable the boss to go, I need to make this decision, or these are the three options I want you to go with.
I think that there's a lot of value in that, because where there's a hesitance to tell your higher level leadership that something might be amiss or that you're not quite as ready as you would hoped to have been, demonstrating that vulnerability is like every military UEI or inspection. Like they wanted you to be perfect, sure. But they were glad when you found the vulnerability before they did. And you at least documented that the vulnerability was there and what your plan was to get healthy, right? And so I think that where there's probably that stifled willingness to say as a leader, hey, things under my charge aren't quite as ready as I would like them to be, bringing that to your boss takes some of the weight off of your shoulders. It isn't, I'm a failure. It's, here's some of the things that I know I need your help with, and I need you to see how serious it is.
I think the other part of that is help the boss prioritize those, because you're the expert. I'm certified in a lot of things. If the boss comes to me and says, hey, what is your recommendation? Be ready to make that recommendation and do it from a point of knowledge rather than guessing, and then be part of that risk calculus. Help the boss understand what the risk is associated with not patching the top 10 CVEs that are out there. You know, what is the risk of making sure, or what is the risk of having somebody take one of your prox cards? What do they have access to? You know, can they get into, you know, a facility that manages a lot of your critical infrastructure? Can they do things that maybe you don't want them to be able to do? What happens if one of your people is social engineered over the phone via the help desk because they want to be helpful? What are those risks associated when training doesn't go the way that it's supposed to do? And that's kind of a full cycle kind of thing, or full circle kind of thing.
Yeah, good. I appreciate the thought. I mean, I really do think that it's interesting that more people aren't having those kinds of conversations, because I think it's healthy and it's helpful. So a lot of this ties back to how people are actually being prepared and whose organizations expect to carry the weight of all of these challenges. You're actively researching cyber leadership and education now. Where do you think we're misaligning expectations for cyber professionals, especially the newer ones? And how does that impact leadership today?
I think there's three things that need to be looked at. Number one, there's an unrealistic expectation that a new cybersecurity professional is going to make six figures right out the door. That is a huge one. And then there are some ecosystems, San Antonio, Washington, D.C., some other large cyber heavy locations where that is skewed a bit, because we are such a cyber heavy. We're the second largest cybersecurity ecosystem in the nation, behind the NCR. So I think that's one. Not everybody's going to make that much money because of the fact that we need folks working on a help desk. Artificial intelligence and automation will fix some of that, but at the end of the day, not everybody's going to make six figures when they graduate from college or they get a certification. The second thing is misaligned job descriptions due to human resources or talent acquisition, or whatever we're calling the folks now, that don't know what the requirements are for a particular role, because those change so fast. So one of the things that I have found during my research is there are a lot of senior folks in HR that won't spend the time talking to the technical folks to be able to go, really, what is it you need? Because it's easier just to ask ChatGPT, hey, what's a network engineer need to have? You know, and now what we've got is we've got a requirement for someone to have a CCNA or a CCNE with 15 years of experience for an entry-level position. Come on, help me out there, right? And then the third thing is there's an unrealistic expectation of senior leaders of what their junior folks need to do. So there needs to be an apprenticeship piece where mid-level technicians help junior level technicians advance their skills, do some upskilling, and then look at, hey, what is the best way for this person, if they have the attitude and the aptitude, to go forward in that career? Because there are some folks that can take tests and get certified, but they're not good at that job. So they may need to go find something else to do.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think those are the three things that we need to look at from a misalignment perspective.
I think it's a good point, because the number of people that I know personally in a circle that have gotten a project manager professional license, like a PMP, and they can't actually manage a project because, all right, you took a test, or okay, you did the thing, you've never actually put it into action. And so going and getting a degree or a certification, good for you, but we do need some experience, and we need experience in a lot of different levels in order for you to be the subject matter expert you want to get paid as. Yeah, good point. Okay, so We are running right up on time here. I would love to keep going, and we'll have you back at any point that you're ready. So what I would like, though, to ask you real quick is what no. Why do certifications and degrees fall short in real environments when we're talking about cyber specifically? Like someone goes and gets their cyber certification in any one of those fields. How is that falling short in execution?
I think one of the biggest things is there's an unrealistic expectation that someone that has a cybersecurity certification is an expert in that thing. They need time to learn whatever the environment is that they're going into. What does that enterprise look like? Because the enterprise in company A that does manufacturing is going to be totally different than the enterprise in company C that does cybersecurity stuff, or the company that does, I don't know, automotive repair stuff, or they work on point of sales kind of thing. So just because you have a security certification doesn't mean you understand how point of sale security works. You don't know what PCI DSS is. You don't necessarily know what HIPAA is for, but you've got a cybersecurity certification, but you want to work in medical health systems. That's unrealistic. So I think that's one of the problems. But the other problem is I think we've overinflated the requirements for some of the certifications. Really, what is required for somebody to be an entry-level technician or a mid-level technician or a senior-level cybersecurity person? Really, what's required? So understanding that from a positionality perspective is extremely important.
Yeah. Yeah. And letting people come in at the entry level and learn their way through some of that, especially because, sure, the skill might transfer, but the environment changes.
Correct.
And so giving them an opportunity to sort of spread their wings in different locations gives them that experience
Yes.
that the company or the government could benefit from.
Correct.
Yeah. Very good. Okay. So now that we're running up on time, I just want your unsolicited advice or input here. So what would you say to cyber leaders who feel responsible for everything, but empowered to change very little?
Understand what your ecosystem is like. What does the enterprise look like? Is there an asset management function that enables you to understand how you can get after where the crown jewels are? So that way now you can prioritize risk to help a business make the best business decisions. That's not a technical requirement. That is a business and a leadership requirement. The other thing that I will add is we're not going to solve all the problems. Cybersecurity leaders aren't going to solve the problems. They need to be able to take requirements and let a board of directors understand that, hey, we need certain technology in order to be able to do a particular job, to be able to make money for the company, and then take that and then translate it down to the technician level so that way the technician knows what they're getting after. What problem are they solving? So that way they've got buy-in to what it is that they're doing, and they're not just punching keys on a keyboard.
Good. Thank you for that. Okay. Well, this has been really helpful for me, especially. So I've appreciated the conversation. Thank you so much for kind of helping us unpack what cybersecurity leadership actually looks like, both in real life and on paper. But why also so many capable organizations often still struggle when expectations, pressure, and reality collide. So this was good. You're always welcome back. We're glad to have you here. And if this episode resonated with any of you, we highly recommend you checking out episode 12, where Kurt Gruber speaks about why secure network probably isn't actually secure at all. And in that conversation, he digs into what defensive cyber requires in real world operational environments, especially at the tactical edge, where connectivity is limited, assumptions break down, and failure isn't theoretical. If you haven't already, make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our future episodes of Unsolicited. And then join us next time as we sit down with Sean Booker and Max Rutenberg from Booker DeMaio to talk about utilizing the power and speed of AI in the federal space. We'll see you next time right here on Unsolicited.